Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna do my top 23 books of 2023, which is kind of exciting. So far I've read 102 books this year, and picking out my top 23 was kind of difficult because I am picky. I have a bunch of books here and we're just gonna get started because this may take a while. I'm not gonna do this in any particular order because that would take way too much effort on my part. So I'm just kind of gonna pick up a book and talk about it a little bit and tell you guys why I liked it and why it's in my top 23. So the very first book I have is none other than Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I finished this earlier this year and it was the most mixed emotions ever. I was so sad to finish this series. I've been putting off the last book because I didn't want it to be over. This was the only book I read in 2023. I read all the other books at the end of 2022, but until then I had never read or seen any of the Harry Potter movies, and let me just tell you, I don't know why I waited so long. It changed my life and I find myself referencing Harry Potter like all the time. I feel like such a nerd, but I love Harry Potter and I am so glad I finally picked up this series. This book was so good. I'm not gonna tell you guys what it's about because it is the 7th in a series, even though I feel like most people have read or seen Harry Potter, but oh my gosh, this book was so good. I was a little disappointed because it doesn't take place at Hogwarts, and like the vibes and the ambiance of Hogwarts is absolutely unmatched. So I was kind of hoping to get more of that vibe, but it doesn't take place at Hogwarts, which was like a little disappointing, but also I get it. I get why, so it's not the end of the world, but I loved it. I really want to reread this series and just like start over. Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and do this book next because you can see it this entire time, and that is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I read The Housemaid and The Housemaid's Secret both this year. There's a third one coming out later in 2024, I'm pretty sure, and I am so excited. I love Frida McFadden's writing. It is so fast-paced and easy to comprehend, and there's no like extra detail. Like everything that she includes in her books is important for the plot, and that's what I love so much about her books. There's no like extra fluff or like descriptions that are unneeded, and sometimes like those can get really boring to me. So I love this book. This is about a girl who gets out of prison and she's having such a hard time finding a job, and she goes to work as a housemaid for this family, and she lives with them, and she lives up in their attic where there's a lock on the outside of her door, not the inside, and all this crazy stuff starts happening in the house, and she is like being blamed for everything, and it was so good. It was so intense. I didn't see the plot twist coming and I absolutely ate this up. And like what I really loved is that the second book also follows the same character, which like the way this book ends, you don't think there would need to be a second, but I'm so happy that there was because I loved getting more of the character. So if you haven't read this series, I definitely recommend it. It's a thriller, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that. The next book that you can just see right now is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I'm gonna keep saying that I loved all these books, but obviously I love them because they were my top books of the year. It was so out of my comfort zone. It's just a plain old fiction book, and it's about people who make video games, and there's like two college friends and they're designing a video game together, but it shows like the struggles they go through with their video game, but also just with life and like how they overcome them. It switches POV, and it was just so good and like heart-wrenching at the same time. Like you really fell in love with these characters and got to know them so quick, and this book was like a work of art. Like I just absolutely loved it. So like if you're looking for a plain old fiction book, I would definitely try this out. Even if you're not too into video games, it's not like all about video games, and it was so good. The next book I have is also just a plain fiction. If you're surprised, I am too. I didn't realize there's this many plain fiction books in my top 23 because normally they kind of bore me. But these ones were all really good. Okay, never mind. This is only the second plain fiction book. But the next book I have is Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. This book is about 14-year-old Mary Jane, and it takes place in the 1970s, and she's a babysitter for this family, and the family that she's babysitting for is super like carefree. They kind of let their daughter do whatever they want. They have people like in and out of the house, whereas Mary Jane comes from a very strict household, so she's kind of learning the world through these people and in a different way than how she would have through her own parents. This book like just simply told her story as a babysitter for this family, and for some reason it was one of the best things I've read this entire year. The next two books I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about now because I can't wait. If you know me, then you saw this coming, and that is both Magnolia Parks and Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home. I will never stop talking about these books. Oh my gosh. Also, can I just say how thankful I am to own the original covers, and these aren't the traditionally published ones either. Like, these are her indie covers. They are so freaking beautiful, and I'm so happy I own them, but I'm not gonna have the fifth one in this cover, and it makes me so sad, but it's fine. These books I did fully annotate both of them. These tabs are a little bit lighter, so you can't really see, but I did annotate the absolute crap out of them. There's probably writing on almost every single page. These are the definition of a 5-star read in my opinion. These are absolute perfection. If I were to recommend a book to anyone, well, I would want for it to be Magnolia Parks, but I understand how this is so hit or miss. If you live under an actual rock and don't know what this series is about, it follows a group of friends living in London, and they're very high society. It's super similar to Gossip Girl, and they just have all these problems. There's drugs, there's drinking. I am counting down the days until February when the next one comes out. I will be locking myself in my room and doing absolutely nothing but reading it. I love the Daisy Hates books too, don't get me wrong. I would have included all 4 books from this universe, but I feel like that would get repetitive, so I just did the 2 Magnolia Parks because they're my favorites. But the Daisy Hates books are absolutely amazing, and I like them better than some of the books I have here. I just didn't want to include all of them. So don't be fooled. I love Daisy Hates, but these ones are just so elite. The next book I have, I read a little bit more recently, and that is called Swear on This Life by Renee Carlino. I love Renee Carlino. This is the second book I've read by her, and they have both been almost 5-star reads for me. The first one, Before We Were Strangers, that was hands down 5 stars. This one, I think I ended up giving it 4.75 or 4.5, and it's simply my fault. I read this book over the span of like 2 weeks, and I kept picking it up and putting it down. Not because I didn't want to read it, but because I was in like a reading slump and a life slump, and I just didn't have the time or the motivation or the will to read. So it kind of like put me off the story a little bit, and I am so upset I read it that way because I think it would have been a 5-star read had I read it like just in 3 days or in 2 days or however. But because I took so long, I kind of stopped caring about the characters. But it's about a girl, and her roommate is reading this book, and she's like, oh my gosh, you need to read this book, it is so good. So the girl reads this book, and it is a book about her life and her childhood, written from her point of view by her childhood lover. Oh my god. This book was so good. So obviously it's childhood friends to lovers, and their story and what they went through is so intense. It's hard not to love this book. This is another book which I know not a whole lot of people love, but I did, and that's In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle. This book is about a girl named Danny, and she is super like down to the numbers. Like, she has a plan for every single part of her life, and it needs to go like according to her plan by her timeline. So she wakes up one day and she's 5 years into the future, and she spends 1 hour in this lifetime, and everything about her life is completely different and nothing makes sense to her. And then she wakes up again and she's back in her previous life, and then the story tells like how her life goes from then to the 5 years in the future, and it is so good. I cried during this book, which I don't even remember if it was sad. I think I might have just been going through it at the time. It was such a unique concept, and I've never read a book similar to this, so I really like that aspect of it. And I'd say it's more of a fiction, less of a romance, but the romance in it was good too. But it was just kind of like her life and the kind of things that people go through at that age. Then I picked up The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is a YA murder mystery series. I've actually only read this first one. I cannot wait to read the others. I just have not had the time. But it's about a group of teens who is recruited by the FBI to work alongside the FBI on cold cases, and these teenagers have like special abilities where they can like naturally profile or a human lie detector, those type of things. And so they work alongside the FBI, and it is just so cool and intense. It was so much like Criminal Minds, and I love Criminal Minds, but that show keeps me up at night. But because this is YA, it was digestible and like it wasn't too intense, which I liked. So this book was amazing, and I definitely recommend it if you love like a good YA murder mystery series. The next book I have is also by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and that's the Final Gambit. I finally got around to finishing this series this year. It has been like 3 years in the works, but oh my gosh, was it worth the wait. I love this series. It's just so fast paced and engaging and fun, and it like keeps you guessing. It's basically about a girl named Avery who receives this huge inheritance from a guy she has never met before, and in order to claim her inheritance she has to live with the family for a year. And there's 4 brothers, so there's a bit of a love triangle, and the old man who she receives the inheritance from loved to play games, and so there's all these different like games and games within games, and you don't know who's playing the game and who's on your side and who's not, and it was so good. And I just love that it like kept you guessing, and you also never knew which brother she was gonna choose, so it was so fun to like root for your favorite. Such a good series. The next book I have is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This was a workplace romance which I hadn't read in quite a while, and I forgot how much I freaking love those. It was so cute, and the main guy in the book has a lot of anxiety, and it was nice to see like anxiety representation done well. And the girl really works with him on his anxiety rather than just being like, you're crazy. And it's so nice to see that in a book. I feel like that is not portrayed often, or it's not portrayed well. So I think Abby Jimenez did a really good job with that. I think this book could have been a bit shorter. It was kind of long and the plot dragged on a bit. They work in a hospital, and I loved that setting. Our main girl is like getting out of a divorce, and she's like not ready to find love. And then of course it hits her at the worst time, but it's so right. And I loved it. The next book I have is also by Abby Jimenez, and that's The Friend Zone. I love Abby Jimenez's writing. It is so good. This book was amazing. It's about a girl named Kristen, and she's having like a medical procedure where she won't be able to have kids, and so she kind of swears off like men and drama. And then her friend is getting married, and she meets the best man, and it's like instant connection. Oh my gosh. This next book literally broke my heart. I was not expecting it, and that's Forever Interrupted by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Oh my goodness. So this book is about a couple who gets married, and then like a couple days later the dude dies. He is like hit by a car when riding his bike and is instantly dead. And the guy never told his mom that he was getting married because he met this woman rather recently. And so the wife goes to the hospital to, you know, pay her respects, etc., and sees his mom, and she's like, I'm his wife. And the mom's like, no you're not, I would have known. And then they like kind of get in a fight, but then the whole book is like them building their relationship and their like mutual love for the son. And oh, it is so good. There's nothing like a mom in a book when her son dies. Oh my gosh, it is so heartbreaking, but watching them build this relationship was so sweet, and it was just so realistic. Like, it did not hide any of the emotions. It showed like how they were feeling and all their like sadness and happiness and grief, and it was so real and so raw. I think this book was so well written. The next book I have is Addicted for Now by Krista and Becca Ritchie. I love this series so much. I haven't continued it since this book because I was waiting to get the 4th, and I finally got it, and I will be continuing it soon. But oh my gosh, I have put this series off for way too long, and I'm so glad I am reading it. It is so good. It's about Lily and Lo, and one of them is a sex addict and one of them is an alcoholic, and obviously that is not gonna go over well, and this book is about them solving their problems. And oh my gosh, just all the characters in the book and the found family and the actual family and all the aspects to it are so good. I am loving this series. The next book I have is Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. This is also just a plain old fiction book, and I love this as like just such a different book. So this is about Dolly and her life, and she kind of takes you through what it's like growing up with parties and dates and jobs and friends and love and all of it. Like, you just see everything and you get her opinion on it and her stance and how it affected her, and a lot of the things she had to say were so eye-opening. And I feel like this is a really good book to read if you're like in your 20s and trying to figure life out, because everyone else is also trying to figure it out, so seeing someone else's perspective was so just refreshing. The next book I have is Vow of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. This is the second book in the little duology, and I love this book. If I'm being totally honest, I can't really remember what Dance of Thieves was about, but this is a fantasy, enemies to lovers. There's war, there's politics, but it was really good and I did enjoy it. I enjoyed the characters and the romance, and the way this is written is just so beautifully done, and she describes things just in such a gorgeous way. The writing in this book is really what like sold it to me. It's very lyrical. The next book I have is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This book is about a widowed actress, and she goes to her family's lake house up in Vermont to escape the press and just get some peace and quiet. And she meets the couple that lives across the lake, and so she has this pair of binoculars and she's just watching them across the lake. And then the woman disappears and she's trying to figure out what happened and where she went, and she's watching the neighbors and she's watching the husband, and it's just so creepy, and she's finding out all these things, and it was just plot twist after plot twist after plot twist. I was like getting whiplash trying to figure out what was going on, but it was so intense and I really enjoyed this book. Kind of following that like thriller vibe, I have Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney. This is about a woman who goes into a coma and she can't move and she can't speak and she can't open her eyes, but she can still hear everything going on around her. And it's so interesting because she's trying to figure out what happened to her. She has no idea how she ended up in the hospital, and all these secrets keep revealing themselves and people keep like admitting to things, and it was just so intense. And there's this plot twist, this little bit at the very end, like the very last page, the last few words, no idea what they mean. If someone knows what they mean, please comment it below. I said this in one of my last videos and I had other people commenting that they also didn't understand it. And so now I'm just confused because I don't know what the last few little bits mean, but I would love to know. So if you know, let me know. We are almost done. Only 5 books left to go. The next book I have is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This is the second book I read by him, but wow, are they both so good. I think I still prefer The House in the Cerulean Sea, but I read that last year, so obviously I can't include it in this year's top 23. It's about a guy named Wallace, and he is being collected from his funeral by a reaper. And essentially Wallace figures out that he's dead, and in his life he was a very miserable, angry man. And so he goes to this tea shop, which like I don't entirely know, I think it's like a halfway point between like life and death, kind of. He finds love and friendship and family, and oh my gosh, it is so sweet. He learns more about himself and how to live and how to not be so miserable all the time, and it was just such a sweet, good book. I guess it's a fantasy. What is it called? Something realism? I don't know. But it was like that. I just love the way TJ Klune writes. Oh my gosh, he does his characters so well. Highly recommend. The next two, I feel like everyone's gonna include them in their top 23, but I'm gonna include them because there's a reason for it. And the first one I have is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This book was so good. Holy cow. This book is about a girl who is a writer, and she works as a columnist for a newspaper, and then she's writing letters to her brother who is in the war through like a magical typewriter, and she slips them under her wardrobe and then they disappear. And then a new letter comes in, but they're not from her brother, and she doesn't know who this secret admirer is. And then she finds out, and it's so sweet and it's so good, and oh my gosh, I love this. This was like historical fantasy, and that is never something I would ever think about reading, but wow, was it so good. The book flew by. Like the plot was so slow, but like for some reason I flew through this. Like, I cannot wait for the second one, which comes out shortly after Christmas, and I'm so excited. Along that same note is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Not really the same note, but I read them one after the other, so they feel similar to me. This is another fantasy book, and it's about a girl named Violet, and they have like different sectors in this world that they live in. Like you can go be a scribe, or you can be a dragon rider, or you can do this or that, blah blah blah. She was always destined to be a scribe. That's what she thought she would do her whole life, and then she decides she wants to go and try and be a dragon rider. And the things they have to go through to get to that point are so intense, and she's just a scrawny little girl, and this book was so good. Oh my god, I love the dragon elements in it. It felt like Harry Potter, which like just made my little heart so happy. And you get a little bit of romance, and you see her building some friendships, you see some enemies. Can't wait to read the second last little sprint here. Next I have Hooked by Emily McIntyre. I read this one recently. It's a dark romance, and it's not really a Peter Pan retelling, but it's like along the lines of Peter Pan. Basically, James's biggest enemy is Peter. And Peter's daughter, Wendy, he like keeps very sheltered. And then they move into this town. And it happens to be the town where James lives. And James's biggest dying wish is to destroy Peter. So he makes Wendy like fall in love with him, and then I'm not going to tell you what happens next because you gotta read it yourself. It really kept me on my toes. My goodness. And then the last book we have is Reckless by Elsie Silver. Oof, this book was so sweet. This is the 4th book in the Chestnut Springs series, and it is a pregnancy trope, which normally I absolutely hate, but it was so good in this book. This is definitely my favorite out of the series. I love all the books in that series, but this was by far my favorite, so I wanted to include it. The romance in this is all I want and more. Like, the way he treats her is the sweetest thing ever, and he like idolizes her, and that it's all I ask. Oh my gosh, this was like the perfect romance in my opinion, and I loved every second of it. Anyways, those are all the books I have for today's video. Those are my top 23 books of 2023. Let me know some of your guys' top books so maybe I can read them next year. And thank you guys so much for watching, for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe. Anything you do helps me out so much, and I love you guys. So I'll see you guys so soon in my next one.